Hello, hello, and welcome to my thought on Monday, which is supposed to be on Sunday. Um, but I seem to get the days all mixed up, and I think it's because we're on lockdown. Today I'm going to talk about irresistible impulses. But one of the irresistible impulses I would love is for you to buy my book. And this is called Getting the Last Laugh. And in this time when it looks like the lockdown is going to be endless, um, at least in London and England, it is. It seems like it just is never going to end. And in the United States, it doesn't seem much better. I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, but it doesn't look good when I read about it in the news. It's nice to read about a dream that came true. And this book, Getting the Last Laugh, on Amazon, is about how I made a dream come true. Wasn't that hard? You can do it too. But today I want to talk about irresistible impulses. Those of you who are my Facebook friends all know that I was spammed, and I was spammed because of an irresistible impulse. I got a Facebook message that said, um, that said, "Look what I found," and I thought, "Oh, I wonder whether it's a clip from when I was younger, or maybe it was a performance that I didn't know I'd done, or maybe it was a special celebration or a special person I met." I was so excited, so I clicked on it. Of course, those of you on Facebook know what happened. You all got hundreds of messages over and over and over again. I am so very, very sorry, but it was because of an irresistible impulse, and we all have them. And not only that, but it is actually a defense in the court because it's so prevalent. But I'm going to tell you some stories about irresistible impulses, and the one I'm going to begin with is with my mother. So we're going to be talking about the 20s. Those of you who've been to my cabarets know that my mother's family was impoverished. They were very, very poor, and for mother used to say that for several years, all they ate were potatoes. And she would say on Friday night, because remember, Friday is the Jewish Sabbath, and that's the night that they try to do something special. And on Friday nights, she said, my mother would squeeze a lemon on the potatoes to make it taste better, which always made me cry. And then sometimes my grandma, for Friday night, would go to the butcher and beg a beef bone, and they would have clear broth, nothing in it, clear broth for their dinner. But somehow my grandma, who was an angel and a genius, even though she had no education, she had no education. She couldn't speak English. Well, she could, but my God, nobody could understand her. She absolutely mutilated it. But she was a genius, and she knew how to love children. And so for Friday nights, she always managed to get some kind of sweet, some kind of cake. She would make one and then make it last for a month, because they had so little money. And there were 5 children. There was my Uncle Charlie, who, because he was a boy, was the king of the place, and then the 4 little girls. And these little girls, imagine what it was like to be hungry all week and never really have enough to eat, but know that on Friday night you were going to get a special treat. And they looked forward to this piece of cake so more than any of us look forward to anything, because we don't know deprivation like they knew in the 20s. So my grandma would cut tiny little pieces of cake, and she would serve my grandpa first, and then my Uncle Charlie, because he was a boy, and then the 4 little girls. And nobody was allowed to eat until everybody was served. And when everybody was served, my Uncle Charlie would say, "Look!" And that's irresistible. When someone says, "Look," everybody looks, right? And when they looked down, Uncle Charlie had taken all their cake. They never forgave him. There's a saying what is the difference between a Jewish mother and a Rottweiler? And the punchline is eventually the Rottweiler lets go. Well, my mother was evidently a Jewish mother when she was very little, because she never let go. We never invited Uncle Charlie over for dinner, and we didn't, because she didn't like him. And there was another reason. There were many reasons, but there was another time when he also tricked her and humiliated her because of an irresistible urge that my mother responded to. In the 20s, when people baked cakes, they used cream of tartar. And cream of tartar has to make the cake rise. And cream of tartar has a terrible smell. So at that time in the 20s, they invented baking powder. And all of you thought it was always around, but it wasn't. It was in the 20s that they invented it. And it was sold by traveling door-to-door salespeople that knocked on your door and sold it. And remember, my grandma couldn't speak English very well, and a salesman came to her door. And the important thing was that cream of tartar stunk. So when you put it in the cake, and the cake would rise, it would look fine. But when you cut into the cake, it smelled like somebody dumped in it. So it could ruin a good chocolate cake. But baking powder had no odor whatsoever. So the salesman came to my grandma's door, knocked on the door, and my grandma, who was very hospitable because that's what Jewish people are, said to him, "Yeah." And he said, although she had no idea what he said, "I have an innovative product for you." She had no idea what he said, but this is somebody coming to our house, and we feed people when they come to our homes. That's what Jewish people do. So she said to him, "I'll get coffee." So she ushered him into the living room. She went and she made some coffee. In those days, my grandma made it with chicory. So it was very, very flavorful, aromatic coffee. And she brought out a saucer, and a cup with coffee in it. And the salesman took the cup out of the saucer, put some baking powder in the saucer, poured some coffee in it, and it made a fluffy, sort of light brown cloud. It was beautiful. And then he said to my grandma, because cream of tartar smelled so bad, "Smell it." And she did. And she had no idea what he was talking about, to show her that it had no odor. And since he couldn't complete the sale because she didn't know what he was talking about. And when my mama, but at that time, my Uncle Charlie was watching all this. And when I tell that in my comedy routine, the punchline is that my grandma said to my Uncle Charlie, "These crazy Americans, they like their coffee with a lot of foam on it, and that's how the cappuccino was invented." I'm not so sure about that, but what happened next is my mother came home from school. My grandma went in to cook whatever dinner she was able to cook. And my mother was a very stylish dresser because in those days, my mother was the oldest, and she got the new dress. After she wore the dress for a year, then my Aunt Hazel got it, and then the next year, my Aunt Tick got it, and then the next year, they tried to give it to my Aunt Celia, but my Aunt Celia was so fat, they couldn't get her in it, so she upset the budget because they had to get her a new dress. So my mother came in from school all dressed and polished and beautiful with her long curls and her big ribbon and her stylish little dress. And my uncle, she walked into the living room, my uncle took this saucer that still had the fluff in it, and he said, "Ida, come here." I said, "I want to show you something." And he put it under her nose, and he said something no one can resist. "Smell it." So she leaned down to smell it, and as she leaned down and put the plate up, and she got baking powder fluff all over her face, she never forgave him, But it isn't just my mother and my family that have irresistible impulses. In the 30s, I think, or the 40s, a man took out an ad in several magazines, and it said, with no photo, it said, "This is the last day to send in your dollar." That's all. And then there was an address. And that man made hundreds and hundreds of dollars with people that just slipped a dollar in the envelope and sent it to him for no reason. It was irresistible. And the other ad that was very similar, that also was going around, and I don't know how they got away with it, was a picture of a man playing the piano. And it was a very proper man. And the caption was, "They all laughed at me when I played the piano. You too can laugh at me when I play the piano. Send your dollar in," and an address. And he too made hundreds of dollars. But just ordinary people have irresistible impulses too. I have a friend named Alan, whom I absolutely adore. But when he drives, he simply cannot resist making a right turn. And the two of us, and of course, those of you who know Pacifica, where I used to live, will understand that in order to get to the major freeway, You took a road called Sharp Park Road, and as you went up Sharp Park Road, and the major freeway would take us either down south or north, and as you went on Sharp Park Road, there was an immediate right turn that took you instead down the coast toward a place called La Honda. And Alan was following me. I was taking him into Redwood City, which meant I had to go up to the top of Sharp Park Road and turn to get on the freeway going south. And he was following me. But as he followed me, he turned onto Sharp Park Road, and there was this right turn, and he just couldn't resist. So he took it. And as I'm driving, I'm looking, and I'm not seeing him in the rearview mirror. And I did have a cell phone, and I called him, and I said, "Where are you?" And he said, "I don't know." He said, "I thought I was following you, but I lost you." And of course, it was because he couldn't resist making a right turn. And one more story, there's two more stories, but there's one more story is of my niece. We don't like to think of my niece Elizabeth as a kleptomaniac, but children are very fascinated by bright colored things, as you know, and they cannot resist touching them. And my sister had taken Elizabeth into a store like Macy's, and put her in a stroller, and she was going through the aisles looking for God knows what my sister was shopping. But as she went on the aisles, my little niece saw these brightly colored little objects that she was passing, and took them, took several. So when my sister got to, I think, the handbag department, she looked down, and Elizabeth had accumulated products all the way through the store that she had just pulled off the shelves. Because that was irresistible. It was irresistible to her. And one more irresistible story. I love children. I cannot resist talking to children. I was on a bus. This is in Stamford Hill in London, which is a very conservative Hasidic community. And a mother got on with this adorable little girl. And I said, I said, "Hello." I said, "How are you?" And she looked at her mother and she said, "What are all those things on her face?" And the mother said, "Wrinkles." And the little girl said, "Oh, I wouldn't want any of those." And I said to her, "Well, the alternative is pretty frightening." But those are irresistible impulses, and those are the things that we have. And I hope that your next irresistible impulse is to buy my book. You can get it on Kindle, but it's got very small print. I would not recommend that. It's got several very positive reviews from people I don't know, believe it or not. And thank you so much for joining me for my thought on this Monday that should have been Sunday.